Hello and welcome to AutoTrader Carology Talks, Forces of Change, Supply and Electric. I'm your host, Ian MacDonald. I'm the CMO over here at AutoTrader.ca. Now, you may have noticed that we've changed the format up a little bit for Carology. In the past, we did lots of in-person, large-scale events. But moving forward, you're going to be seeing us producing more content in a virtual way so that it suits your busy schedules better and you're able to watch this content on demand. And that's actually based on the feedback that we've got from our dealer partners. We love getting together in person and seeing each other and speaking, but by recording the content virtually and then making it available to you on demand, many more of our dealer partners can access the content and enjoy it according to their own schedule. Now, we're still going to be speaking to some of the most influential and prominent people in not just Canadian automotive, but global automotive in different markets as well. But this new format will be delivered in a snappier way and more on demand, as I say. So today, I'm joined by Nick King. Nick is Insights Director at AutoTrader UK. Nick is a seasoned guest. This is his third time joining us for Carology. We're so happy to have him, as we always are. We're going to be talking about all things electric vehicles and also, crucially, the other lens on the electric vehicle evolution, which is to do with the supply and some of the supply issues with new vehicles that we've all been experiencing over the last 2 or 3 years, and how that lens shifts how we think about electric as well. There's quite a bit of buzz surrounding EVs, I'm sure you have seen, like everybody else in automotive, including certain commitments made by the government coming just 8 years from today, specifically 2030, whereby EVs are projected to account for 90% of new vehicle sales. So we have quite a way to go from where we are today, at least here in Canada, to get to that 90%. So we're asking Nick to join us to share his insights and expertise based on what the folks over at AutoTrader UK are seeing. Generally speaking, the UK is normally a couple of years ahead of Canada when it comes to consumer adoption and technology and things like that. And so it proves true as well with electric vehicles. So it's always really interesting to hear what's going on over there. Yes, they're different markets with their own nuances, but it can provide us with a little glimpse into maybe what's coming ahead for us here in Canada over the next 2 or 3 years. Nick's going to be sharing the latest trends surrounding the adoption of EVs in the UK. And crucially, some key takeaways to help you in your dealership and your operations prepare for that slow but steady pivot towards electric vehicles. So thanks for joining me today, Nick. How are you doing?
Hi, Dave. Lovely to see you again, and thanks for having me back. Great to see you. And apologies, I have a bit of a cold, so I'm a bit throaty. Apologies if I sound a bit deep.
I can assure you the pleasure is ours, Nick, and thank you for still making the time to do this, even though you are suffering with that slight cough. So, look, Nick, I know you have so many insights to share with us today. We can't wait to get started. I'm sure it's the same for the audience. So why don't we jump right into it? You do what you do best and take it away, please.
Thanks, Ian. Brilliant. Well, lovely to see you all virtually again, and hope all is well with everybody. So, as Ian so eloquently put it, I would like to talk us through forces of change, supply and electric. Well, because we have been through some strange times, as we all know, in the last couple of years, and there are some real forces of change happening for all of us. So what I'd like to do actually is just set the scene, and I don't mean to be glib in this phrase here. 200 years ago, most of the world lived in poverty, and today it's just 9%. And is it technology that has changed this? Well, no. Technology evolves. It's obviously had a part, but let's just look at how technology developments help improve our lives. If we go back to the 1880s, go back 140 years, over 140 years, in England, and I imagine it was similar in Canada too, towns in England had to cope with over 100 million tons of horse manure every month in their towns and cities. You can't imagine that amount of horse manure, because of course that's how everything was moved around. We had horses. Men wore spats on their legs. Women had long flowing coats, not out of a sense of fashion, but because of the unbelievable liquid manure which was running around our cities and streets. Sounds revolting. It was revolting, but we didn't know any different. And there were traffic jams because, of course, the roads were quite smaller, and they were noisy because horses' hooves on cobbles is incredibly loud. Hospitals even told us they had to put straw down outside their hospitals at night to try and keep the noise down. It was a very noisy, smelly place. We didn't know any different because that's the world we lived in. But in the 1920s, the car replaced horses. And everyone thought, oh, hooray, zero emissions. Well, nothing we can tread in, admittedly. So technology happens quickly. It took just 110 years to go from steamships to overthrow sail ships. Just 110 years. And that revolutionized commerce and travel. It took 70 years for the car to overthrow the horse and carriage. It took 45 years for the jet engine to overthrow the propeller engine and absolutely overthrow commerce and travel. And in the UK, it took us 22 years from the launch of the first EV, which is one of these tiny little things called a G-Whiz, very small EV, to the Tesla, just 22 years. And it only took 2 years for all of us on the planet to go through what was a mass-forced experiment into a mass-forced tech adoption. And example A is this, the webinar, the Zoom call, the Teams call, the Google Hangouts that we're all so used to doing now. Just 2 years. Because it's easy and convenient. Who carries cash now? Do you have much cash in your pocket now? I don't carry cash anymore. But I remember when I changed, it's the old tap, 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 isn't it? You tap your, and if you haven't even got your card, you can use your phone. I know people who don't even have a wallet, they just use their phone. And you go up to the machine and they say, oh, no, sorry, you've got to actually put your card in and tap your number. And you go, well, how inconvenient. I've got to spend 4 seconds putting in my number, which is ridiculous because it's so easy. But we forget how quickly that happened. Go back 5 years ago and no one was doing this. And it's much like the battery electric vehicle. It's coming quickly. The uptake of EVs is proving to be the fastest uptake in technology yet. So uptake of new technology is happening quicker for all of us all the time. And this permeates into all corners of our lives. If we're all going to have to charge electric vehicles, as we are if we buy them, through apps on our smartphones, we have to ensure that everyone can do this. All age groups, everyone, no matter how old you are. And this mass-forced tech adoption we've all been through in the last couple of years has helped us do that. The QR code, as you see here, when you hover your phone over it, who used a QR code as much as we do now before 2020? My parents in their late 80s couldn't use a QR code. They'd never even heard of them 2 years ago, but now they can. Of course, they're going to have to. If you go into a restaurant and a pub in the UK, the menu is a QR code. You have to use it. So what's happened is changes brought about by technology have been getting faster. So bear this in mind when we get into the real big forces of change. Now, I'm talking obviously about the UK, but as Ian said, we have similar markets. We may be slightly ahead of the Canadian market, but they are similar. And I know you would have had similar problems with supply, as everyone did, the whole world, because of course all the factories were shut. In the UK, and I imagine it's similar in Canada too, what we used to live with was a world of oversupply. The car park, the number of cars available and driven and around in the UK grows, but up to 2019, we lived in a world of oversupply. Factories would be working 24/7, producing vehicles and sending them out. And say you were in this is the Volkswagen factory in Wolfsburg in Germany, where they produce cars for the whole world. The cars come out of this massive factory, are sent onto container ships and sent off around the world. And in the UK, they could end up in Bristol docks or Southampton, and then cars will be then stored in disused airfields. There's a disused airfield in the middle of the UK called Bruntingthorpe. It was an air base. It's just got runways. And if you went there in October 2019, you would have seen 20,000 cars parked there waiting to be bought. If you go there today, it's nearly empty because, of course, we've been through COVID and now there are no cars sitting waiting to be bought. You have to actually pre-order them. And this produces this rather complicated slide, but this I'm sure will be similar for your market too. And this, you don't have to look at the numbers, but look at the colors. This is just new car registrations. And it starts on the top line, top left in 2001, and we're modeling up to 2032 on the right-hand side. And every year, this is millions. So if we look at, say, the middle 14, that's 2014, there were 2.5 million new cars registered in the UK. Roughly 1 million go to private buyers and the rest go to lease and rental companies. So 2.5 million were registered in 2014, 2.6 million in 2015, 2.7 million in 2017. And these cars become then, as we go down this scale, a 1-year-old car, a 1 to 3-year-old car, a 3 to 5-year-old car in the future. But when we look at 2020, 2021 and 2022, there were only in the UK 1.6 million cars registered and 1.6 million in 2021. And we estimate that there's going to be only 1.7 million by the end of this year. That means that's around 2 million fewer new cars registered in the UK. And those new cars will go on to become used cars. So when we look at 2023, 2024, 2025 in the future, there's going to be less 1 to 3, 3 to 5-year-old cars than there were before. So supply is going to remain tough. When we haven't come out of this disruption from COVID yet, it's going to go on for a few more years. And when we look at the retailers in the UK, and I imagine it's similar with you too, the age of their stock has got older too. In 2019, which is the bottom line, the average age of stock for retailers in the UK was 2 years old. And you can see many have much younger. So Abarth, which is 1.6 years, Jaguar 1.5, Volvo 1.7, Seat 1.6, much younger. But by today, in 2022, the average age is 3. And in many cases, it's over 3. The issue here for the franchise retailer is, for franchise retailers, a used car up to 3 years old can be offered as an approved used scheme. They can offer all the approved used benefits that you buy from the franchise retailer. But if the car is over 3 years old, you can't offer that scheme. So it means that there's a more level playing field for the franchises and the independents together, because they're both offering effectively the same vehicle with the same benefits. There's no benefit in you can't get that benefit of an approved use scheme for the franchise because the car's too old for it. So what it means for the franchises is they have to up their game in their digital retailing. And in the UK, in many cases, the independents, because they can only offer a fantastic digital service, they don't have the approved use, offer a beautiful digital service. 50, 60, 70 pictures, audible, great videos, great descriptions. They go over the top in customer service because that's all they can offer. And the franchises can be a bit lazy, it's not the right word, but they can be take their eye off the ball a bit and not try quite so hard, but they're going to have to because supply isn't coming back that quickly. This isn't my slide. This is from the SMMT, but this simply says they asked a huge panel of retailers, when do you think supply is going to come back? And 2/3 said, well, it'll be the second half of next year. 2 in 10 said, well, by 2024 at the end again. So it's not coming. And what happens with that is you get this ridiculous slide. So I've been at AutoTrader now for 16 years. I have never been able to present such an amazing slide as this. And this is the month-on-month price increase or value increase of vehicles over the last 2 years. Cars do not go up in value. You know this. I'm sure it's the same in Canada. They lose money as they drive off the forecourt, unless you have something exotic like a Pagani Zonda or a hand-built Morgan or something unbelievably rare. But cars don't go up in value. But yes, they have been, because lack of supply and an increase in demand. We saw 5, 6, 7% increases at first, which was amazing. And then it got to unbelievably around April this year, 30%. Your car was worth 30% more this April than it was last April, which is mad. All the retailers I talk to, and I talk to many all the time, say they have had surprisingly a good time for the last 12 months. Margins have been fantastic because demand is there. So this red line shows the average asking price, and look how much it's jumped. It's gone from around 14,000 to 17,000. And at one point during lockdown last year, used cars were going for more than the new car because there was a waiting list for the new car. And if you wanted it now, you have to pay for it. We've now got, but it is coming down. So now the latest numbers, actually, we've got them. I haven't included them in this deck yet because it's very, very new. We think we're still around 10, 11% up on the year before. So we're still ridiculously inflated. And the good thing about working at somewhere like AutoTrader for me is that we have a huge amount of data, a ridiculous amount of data. We have around 11 million unique visitors a month on AutoTrader. There's only about 42 million adults in the UK. We have about a quarter coming to our site every month. 55 million searches a month, billions of page impressions searched, and we track everything. And this gives us a good view, and we also know what's selling, what isn't selling at the auctions and at retailers, and what they're selling it for. This gives us a good view of what people are looking for and what changes are happening. And in June 2020, the start of lockdown, this headline ran in one of the one of the major papers in the UK, and it said used car prices may fall by 7% this year as pressure was placed on the market. But we know they didn't. We know they all took off. And this was a company basing a decision on a limited amount of data and a sort of knee-jerk reaction, and it was wrong. And they've since retracted this, but it was wrong. It was in the national press. So what if, as a retailer, you'd read this and thought, oh my God, I better get rid of all my stock. I better liquidate my stock. This is a disaster. What if you'd done that? You'd be in real trouble now. So what it means is, and what I'm trying to hint at here is, you've got to make sure you've got the right data to really help you. It's worth having the right data to make sure you make the right decision. So supply is still tough, and it's going to stay there for a while. The next force of change is this. It is the rapid electrification of the UK's car park, and it will be, I imagine, your car park too. Because what's happened in the UK is, so far this year, alternative fuel vehicles have outsold petrol and diesel for the first time ever. And it really took off in April, because in April we got a ridiculously expensive cost per litre of fuel. Fuel sensitivity does have a major impact on EV searches, electric vehicle searches. This chart simply shows the white line is stock of new EVs on AutoTrader, and the blue is searches or ad views of new EVs. And you can see little spikes, and what these represent is activity. So when our government said it's not going to be 2040 that you can't buy a new internal combustion engine anymore, it's going to be 2035. They announced it, and the day, in fact, the hour they announced it, we saw a little spike of activity, and you can just see it here, bottom left. People started searching for, better start looking for an EV. And then they went back to normal. Said, oh, actually, it's ages. I'll be okay. Then, in the middle of 2020, they said, actually, no, it's not going to be 2035. It's going to be 2030. We saw a much bigger spike. Oh, blimey, I really should start looking for an EV now. And then, for common place, psychologically, that's what all humans do. We go back to what we know. We think, oh, actually, it's ages. I'll be okay. I'll keep looking. I can still buy petrol. And what happened here in the UK a year ago, almost today, is we had a petrol crisis. 12 petrol pumps were listed as saying we're running a bit low on fuel. I remember reading about it in the paper, and I thought, I live in the southeast, and I thought, and they were in the southeast, so I thought I better go and fill up my car just to be safe. I went there, a few more people than normal filling up. I come back, tell my wife, I better go and put some fuel in the Mini because it's going to be panic tomorrow. She went, no, it'll be fine. Next day, it was all over the press. It was panic, nightmare. We're running low on fuel. It's a disaster. It was awful, completely media-led. It was awful. We had queues quarter of a mile long outside our petrol stations. There was one at a Tesco, which is a supermarket near me, a quarter of a mile queue for petrol. People were fighting on the forecourts with knives, and that was the women. And I live in a nice area. But anyway, it was scary. But as the petrol started to come back into the pumps, what we saw was, searches begin to dwindle again. And then actually, no, I'll go back to what I know. I'll just keep looking at petrol cars and diesel cars. And then Russia invades Ukraine, which is the next spike. And then we have £2 a litre, which is unbelievably expensive. And what this does is this changes actually the types of EVs that people are looking for. So these are the top 10 EVs on AutoTrader, new, that people look for, and it changes all the time. On the left, you see in 2019, top 10 EVs people are looking for were the Audi e-tron, I-Pace, Golf, Leaf, and the Zoe. The Golf is a rabbit, I think you call it in Canada, so it's a VW. Renault is a Zoe. The red line shows when the car goes out, and the blue line shows when a model comes into this chart. And you can see actually it changes completely. And if you look at the right-hand side, this is the current up-to-date searches and ad views, and they're all different. They're all different cars. There's one brand or mark that's followed all the way through, and that is the Chinese MG brand. And you can follow it. It's a black line. Why has MG stayed the course? Because they're virtually the only company that's making an affordable electric vehicle. They've just launched the MG4. which is a sort of five-seater small family hatchback, fully spec'd with leather, cooled and heated electric seats, all the tyres you want. You can buy one in the UK for £28,000. The equivalent spec'd BMW, Audi, Mercedes is more like 50,000. Ridiculously more expensive. What we saw for a long time is the people who are buying EVs in the UK have been the more wealthy because they're expensive and they can charge them at home because they've got to drive. But we need to get the whole planet driving EVs if we're going to save the planet. So it's a bit more urgent. But what's interesting is to see how the prestige brands like BMW and Mercedes have come back. It really did look like Hyundai and Kia were going to completely lead the way. In the UK, we have something called the EV6 and the Ioniq 5 from Hyundai and Kia, and they are fabulous, big electric vehicles and very expensive, similar price to a BMW, Audi, Mercedes, and they were eating away very successfully at BMW, Audi and Mercedes market share. But BMW and Mercedes are not going to go down without a fight. They're coming back. But of course, we do have the Chinese brands appearing too. And I haven't mentioned Tesla because this is looking at brands who don't just make EVs. Tesla, of course, in the UK, absolutely huge, ridiculously enormous. But these are brands who also have had to change, and that's why I think this is a bit more interesting. So that's new. And when we look at the used EV market, it's a similar story. The stock, as you can see, is far less, hardly any stock. Only 2% of our stock is used EVs. But the spikes when the government makes an announcement. So is that just interest or something more concrete? Well, actually, I think it's something more concrete because this is median days to sell. How quickly, how many days does it take to sell each type of car by fuel type? The red line is EV. The white line is hybrid. Blue is petrol, grey is diesel. In May last year, it was taking a median 50 days to turn an EV. Today it's 20. 20. Looking at diesel, hybrid, electric, they've hardly changed. But diesel, hybrid and petrol, they've hardly changed. But electric has gone from 50 days to 20. That's quite dramatic. And we estimate EVs will account for around half of all new car sales by just 2026. And as Ian said, 90%, possibly 100% by 2030. So when people call it the road to 2030, actually, it isn't the road to 2030. If half of new car sales will be EV by 2026, it's actually quite a lot earlier. By 2030, over a quarter of all the cars on the roads in the UK will be electric. So what does this mean for you if you're a retailer, you're going out looking and buying stock at auctions? Well, next year, a quarter of the 0 to 1 year old cars at the British auctions will be electric. A quarter. By 2027, a few years' time, half of the 1 to 3 year old cars are going to be electric. What if you haven't started thinking about getting into electric yet? Because in just a few years' time, half of the cars, if you sell 1 to 3 year old cars, half of them in a few years' time will be electric. Are you ready for it? By 2029, half of the 3 to 5 year old cars you find at auctions will be electric. And by 2030, a quarter of the 5 to 10 year old cars. So this is an opportunity to really get into this because the market is going to change. It's only going to build. There'll be 4 times more in the overall car park, the overall volume of cars by just 2025, which is 3 years' time. And some retailers have got into this. We did a big piece of research. We asked 341 retailers, a mix of independent and franchise. Are you ready? Do you think it's going to happen? Do you have things in place? If not, why not? And actually, what's surprising is almost 80% said, I don't even think the legislation is viable. What? 79%. Do you think the ban's viable? No, I don't think it is. Well, in the UK, if it's set in stone, if it's legislated, it's going to happen unless the government makes a U-turn. For those of you that have watched any of our UK politics, you'll know that our current government makes a few U-turns, but this will be a very big U-turn to make if it didn't happen. But at the moment, it is set in stone as 2030. Are you ready to sell EVs? Just over half saying no. No, not even ready. Why aren't you ready? 1 in 5 retailers said was a real challenge in acquiring technicians with EV skills. 1 in 5 say maintaining revenue from after sales is going to be a real challenge. Well, yeah, it is. There's not a lot to do on an EV. I heard some manufacturers say it's 0.3 of an hour is all the servicing takes on an EV when it comes in for its first service. 0.3 of an hour. That's, what can you do with that? Well, virtually little. So are you ready? How prepared is your business to sell EVs? The dark blue is the black, sorry, is franchise, and the light blue is an independent response. And you can see on the right hand side, over 40% of independents saying, how prepared? Well, actually, no, not really, not at all, in fact. How capable is your business in selling EVs? Again, the black is franchise and the light blue is independent. Sort of. What changes, if any, have you made? Look on the right hand side. The independents, none. No changes, say over half. When do you think you'll be ready? 2030 and beyond, say most. So the used electric car market is going to grow rapidly in the next few years. Everyone's going to be affected because it's coming. So the next few years are an opportunity to really grow market share if you can. As an independent, because you're not going to get the training, if you're watching this as an independent, you could be thinking, oh, blimey, I have to teach myself the features and benefits. It might take me a while to catch up. As a franchise, you'll be given these by your manufacturer, by the OEM. They'll be sending you all the information. They'll be putting you on training courses. Grab these, take the opportunity, because it's a real golden opportunity to try and shine out here, because it's going to be tough. And just a final nail in the coffin, there is a compound effect. The reason I talked about supply as well is this. Imagine you have a 50 car forecourt. Just for ease of maths, you have a 50 car forecourt. You sell typically 3 to 5 year old cars, and you haven't got into EV yet. You haven't got into electric vehicles. You don't think it's going to happen yet. You don't think it'll really take off. You're not interested. In 2 years' time in the UK, because of those 2 million lost new car sales that were not registered in 2020 and 2021, that's a 30% drop in the 3 to 5 year old cars you can buy at auction. So you haven't got a 50 car forecourt, you've actually only got a 35 car forecourt, because the other cars don't exist. And at the same time, 20% circa of the 3 to 5 year old cars you can buy at auction will be electric, but you don't sell electrics. So when you look at your stock, you haven't got a 50 car forecourt, you've got a 25 car forecourt. That could be a disaster. So how do you know what to buy? Do you have a market? What's the demographic profile of an EV buyer? What is the local regional demand? What other brands do they consider? As a internal combustion engine retailer, which we all are and we have been forever, you know your market, you know this engine, you know this, you know how this works. The similarity between an EV and an internal combustion engine is this: 4 wheels, seats, a steering wheel, and windows. But they're very different commodities. You can drive an EV with one leg, for example. You've got regenerative braking. It's fun, it's a different experience. If I came to you and said, I bought in a Partix, I said, I've got a BMW 320d M Sport in grey, full service history, 60,000 miles, full leather interior, pan roof, 20-inch alloys, you would know as I drove it in what you'd give me for that as a part exchange, because you've sold those day in, day out, or you've seen them come in, day out. You would know what you're going to advertise it for. If you're going to sell it, you would know how many days it will take to sell, and you probably know what it will go for. The EV is different. Could you do that for a Leaf, or a Tesla, or a Neo, or an Xpeng, or any of the new brands that are coming in? No, you can't. You need the data to help you. We have data. When you advertise with AutoTrader in the UK, you get access to a whole load of data, and you pay for it. Of course you do, because it's valuable stuff. Use the data to help you. Don't try and make the decisions. You are experts in your own worlds completely, but this is new. What can I sell it for? What do I pay for it? How quickly will it turn? Are the questions you will ask yourself about EVs, because this is new. Don't beat yourself up if you don't know, because this is new. But use the data available to you to help you make those decisions. And how do you sell it? Well, you've got to understand the product features and benefits. Teach yourself, learn, watch, read. Have you driven an EV? Mad question, isn't it, to ask? But I present these kind of information and insights quite often. I was with a large group last week in the UK well-known brand, big brand in the UK, had 10 sales managers in the room from this one group of retailers. And I said, hands up who's driven an EV, and only half of them put their hands up. The other half hadn't even driven one. How can you sell something you've never driven? And it is different. Rent one, hire one, borrow one, drive one, have a go. Have you got your charging infrastructure set up? Have you got charging stations set up at your dealership? If not, really, shouldn't you start thinking about it? How do you answer the questions that the consumer's going to have about charging? Can you talk to me about 7 kilowatts and 7 kilowatt hours and 20 kilowatts and 20 kilowatt hours? And do you understand the differences? This is all complicated stuff. And psychologically, for consumers, if something's difficult, what do we always do? We revert back to the easy option. If you remember that chart I showed where we saw the spikes with fuel sensitivity when the government mentioned something, but what did they all do? They all went back to the normal, because it's like, oh, if I haven't got to do something awkward, I'll go back to what I normally do, which is buy petrol and diesel. How do you sort your test drives out? Do a different test drive for an EV? Absolutely. The one killer thing about EVs are they're fun to drive. No matter what model you have, you get instant acceleration. Even the cheapest ones are fun. It's a different experience. They're quiet. They're silent. So make the most. And one question I get asked a lot is, who's brilliant at this? Who's already doing this well? There are some great examples in the UK of retailers who are selling EVs, used EVs, and the ones who sell the best are the ones who answer questions in plain English. Don't try and hide behind acronyms and use just numbers and odd EV sounding phrases. Just tell me in English, what's this car like to drive? How much fun is it? What's the range going to be? What's the realistic range? Don't try and hide anything. So it's clear that the current supply conditions are not just current. They're the way the market's going to be for some time to come. So you need to plan for this. Adapt your strategies on sourcing and selling and pricing. And the EV just adds further complexity. This is something really big to get to grips with. Your years of experience are going to become less valuable as the market changes so rapidly. Your used car buyer, your sales manager, you know whether you have a market for a car and how to sell it and what to price it for and roughly what you can make for it. But this experience isn't true for electric cars. It's new. And then, of course, the customer's going to ask different things too. And merchandising is going to need more thought. And the values and prices are going to be entirely new too. Battery degradation, for example. So use of data, if you can get it, if you have access to it, use it, especially in pricing. That could be one of the most important levers you can pull metaphorically in realizing the opportunity that this provides for you.
Thanks so much, Nick. That was fascinating as always. I think, well, for those of you in the audience that haven't enjoyed Nick's content at Carology before, I think you can see now why he is so aptly named as the king of automotive inside the UK. I won't embarrass you, Nick, but that. I said, thanks so much. You know, it's always fascinating for me in particular when we get together to see how similar a lot of the trends and what's happening kind of is with the data that we see as well. As you know, we have our kind of price index. It almost mirrors that price action that you're seeing in the UK as well as the spikes and the drops in demand for EV. I remember earlier this year when fuel prices here also kind of first went a bit out of control. Same thing, we saw, I think it was a 500 or 600% increase in leads on electric vehicles, and the search went up, and then it calms down a little bit, and there's a little bit of a reversion back to the normal kind of thing. But anyway, always interesting to see how similar our two markets behave, despite obviously the nuances that they have. We do have a few questions that were sent through when we announced that we'd be speaking to you from our dealer partners. So it's okay with you, Nick. I'd love to run a couple of these past you and
sure.
See what your thoughts are. Okay, so I think you actually touched on this a fair bit, but for what it's worth, maybe we'll kind of re-clarify. So the first question is, what do you recommend as the initial steps for dealerships to prepare for the adoption of EVs? So, there are obviously government resources available in Canada. That's at the government website, Canada.ca. I know they have resources for dealers and things like that, but perhaps on a more sort of practical level for someone like you, Nick, who spends a lot of time with dealers, as you mentioned, all the kind of government and legislative stuff, that's all great. But what are some of the things that you see? You said, for example, some of the retailers you speak to, the sales staff haven't even driven an EV.
Well,
anything else obvious that comes to mind?
yeah, but it really is that obvious, isn't it? I mean, and then I have, oh, well, we don't have any in stock. We'll go and borrow one, try one, hire one. You know, literally. I mean, there's an awful program in England called Love Island. I don't know if you have it over there, but it's awful. I don't watch it. It's like me trying to sell Love Island to you. If I've never watched it, if you've never watched the program, I'm not going to sell it to you. So you have to at least have tried the vehicle. And I mean, that's so rule one is just go and drive one. So I've yet to meet a car salesman who can't physically drive. There are some who are learning to drive, I know, admittedly, but yeah, at least drive the vehicle. Charging. You must have some charging set up in your dealers. You must have the capacity, at least one charging station, so that you can charge your EVs or people can come and charge. Because there's another element that I didn't realize until recently is when you're servicing an EV, it has to be over 80% charged. So if someone comes in with a car and it's only got 60% charge in it, you can't even start working on it until it's at 80% charge. So it's like, my God. So if you're not actually set up to do it, and if you've only got one of those 3-pin trickle chargers, which takes 26 hours, you know, basically that's not going to work. So you've got to have at least a 22 kilowatt charger at your base, so you can actually charge it to 80% in 40 minutes or so. So get your charging set in, and that, of course, is going to be an expense. This isn't free, is it? This is another expense to be coming. But if you've got the charging infrastructure set in, tell everyone you've got it. Get people to come in for a cup of coffee and look at the new vehicle and charge while you're here. Get use of it. Make it earn its pay. But don't and try and find someone in your dealership who's going to embrace this and learn and be the champion. Because this is complicated stuff. It is complicated stuff. But if you start to really read up about it, it isn't that complicated. You do need to do some homework, study and learn, and then have a champion who can then teach the rest of the staff, or at least be the go-to person when someone comes in and start talking about EVs. You don't want to have and if they're on holiday or ill, you don't want to have no one there. So we do all need to start getting into it. But start to read up. So in the UK, we have the company in the UK. You could, if you want to have a look at them, they were called Luscombe's. They're a retailer in the UK called Luscombe's. They sell Suzuki and they sell MG, and they are hands held above seen as the greatest exponents of how to sell a used EV. If you went to AutoTrader in the UK and looked for Luscombe's and looked for an MG and looked for a used one, you would see how they advertise it, and it is so pretty. They're simple, clear descriptions. They've taken good photos. They've taken the good photos of the relevant bits of an EV. Of course, there are going to be different elements in an EV to an internal combustion engine car too. You know, what's the charging dock look like, and what cables does it come with, and what do I need at home? You need to have these answers ready for when I come and ask you. So I want to buy an MG EV. What do I need to do at home? Can you help me get my charging sorted out? You can't do that yourself, but you should have at least, I don't know, but I do know where you can go to ask. These are the kind of questions. Why would I buy something that's complicated if I can't do it? So those are the basics to start with, I would suggest.
That makes sense, Nick. And yeah, I mean, we talked about it being a sort of slow and steady pivot. And I mean, I think it is, you know, you could look at it and say, well, it's still a long way away, you know, to 2030 and things like that. I think the other thing is here in Canada, I believe that the kind of targets are slightly different to the UK because they include hybrids as a zero emission, some nuances like that. But yeah, the biggest thing I sort of take away from some of your advice to dealerships there is kind of just don't live in denial. It's kind of, you don't have to go crazy, and there's no sort of need to panic, but certainly you have to start doing something. And I love the idea of kind of appointing an internal advocate. I think through any kind of period of change in business, it's really useful to have someone who's up for it and interested in it, and they can be the advocate, the evangelist inside the dealership, and you know, make life easier and kind of share, you know, what they're learning and stuff with their colleagues there at the dealership kind of thing. So
that's exactly what. So this Luscombe's I mentioned, that's exactly what they do. Luscombe's is a family business, and it's Robin runs it, and Sam, his son, is the EV advocate, and he's just run with it. And Robin said, "Go on, then. You're young, you know, you're 20 something. You understand all this. You know, Robin's my age." And he was like, I'm trying to learn. And it was just perfect. It's perfect. So Sam has just flown with it. So yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, and you touched on something else that was interesting, kind of relates to another question we had, which was about should we take a different approach to sell an EV compared to a gas-powered vehicle? And yeah, I mean, I would think it's based on what you're kind of saying. It's like, well, yeah, there's a little bit more of an educational component, but again, like you mentioned, I think for the average consumer, it seems complicated, but a lot of their questions are extremely basic, just about kind of charging. If you haven't had an EV, how would you know? Whereas I should imagine, I mean, it would at least be helpful, if not arguably the dealer's role, to be able to demystify some of that basic stuff. Would you agree?
Yes, totally, exactly. We've all lived for the last 80 years in going to petrol pumps and just putting petrol in, and you've watched your parents do it, or your brother do it, or your sister, and no one showed you how to fill a car. You've seen it on programs. You've just said, oh, no one teaches you how to fill a car. You just go and do it, don't you? It's almost instinctive. But this is completely new. I used to have people say to me, this was just a couple of years ago, can I charge my car in the rain? Because electricity and water don't mix, do they? Just like,
that's a good question.
yeah. What if it's pouring with rain? And you go, this is like, how? Of course it's safe, but it's like, if that's a fear factor for people, you're going to go, well, I'm not. It's like putting an electric fan heater in the bath. You're just not going to do it, are you? So make it as blindingly obvious as it can that this is safe, this is easy, and it's something that everyone can do. But you need to show me. Some in the past, the industry is as guilty as anyone. You'll have different names for different kind of charging things. You have I can't even name them, they're so complicated. But it's not just it's not just a standard pin. There's like there's a supercharger, there's an additional one, there's something else, Not all chargers are the same. You have to register yourself for an account if you're going to use external charging. You have to have your phone working. You have to register. What if your phone's run out of power? Oh, I can't get it to work, can I? So there's so many what if. So think about if you, as a reader, think about what are the questions I'm going to be asking if I know nothing about this. What I presented at the last Carology was jobs, not journeys. And it was the jobs we have to do and things you have to do, and there are more than you thought to buy a car. And of course, the EV adds even more. It's not just brand, type, and spec. It's charge, range. How do I charge? What app do I need? How do I register? What cables do I need? Can I have one at home? Which one should I buy? Hang on, it's like another. It's just so you need to. We know that the retailers that help consumers tick off those jobs.
Yeah.
Help me buy more often. So ask yourself, and in fact, a good way to test is talk to someone in your team who knows nothing about cars and say, if you were going to buy an EV, what would you like to know? What are the questions you'd ask? And they're going to be the obvious ones like, how do I charge? What do I charge? What do I need? If you can answer me those, then you're right on the right way for helping the consumer who's going to come in with exactly those questions. So, as you said, don't be in denial. It's not 2030. It's going to happen a lot sooner, because in a couple of years' time, half of the stock you can buy will be EVs. They'll be used, and people want to buy them, and they'll have the questions.
Yeah, and you really build trust with the consumer by being the one that can answer those questions and help them navigate it. I think, for us in the automotive industry, and that includes dealers, we're the first to admit it, because we're into all this stuff. Sometimes we can get a little technical and a bit caught up on the acronyms and stuff, and that can really lose a lot of consumers who aren't, auto enthusiasts or whatever it might be. So more than ever, I think with the electric thing, because it has, like you mentioned, it's that added, not necessarily complex, but it's added new information about charging and whatnot. It's really important to try and keep things accessible and simple, and not kind of make it seem even more daunting for a consumer that maybe knows very little, just because they've never had an EV kind of thing.
Absolutely. So so an example of someone getting it wrong. This is an example of something getting wrong. So I live in, we grew up, you lived in Croydon, I live just down the road from you in London, in Bromley. And in Bromley, there's something called Transport for London, which runs all of the transport in London. And we have a ULEZ, a low emission zone, which is coming out to Croydon. So mum and dad are going to have to, it's a right pain. So I've got an old Mercedes, got a 10-year-old Mercedes, which doesn't pass the ULEZ emissions. I'm going to have to pay £12 a day to drive my Mercedes, £12 every day just to keep my car when the emission zone comes to me. So obviously I'm probably going to have sold the car, but I need to register so that I can actually pay this amount. rather than have it deducted every time I move the car, rather than have to phone up every day and pay. I can't do it. The site isn't working. It doesn't work. It's a disaster. I'm not thick. Well, I'm not a genius, but I know I'm not that thick. I cannot get it to work, and it's so frustrating. And I'm telling everybody about it. And maybe it's some conspiracy to say you've got such an old car, we don't even want your car, so we're going to make it impossible for you. Could be that. Unlikely. It's just a bad system. It's just not easy. And if something isn't easy, I don't do it, and we don't do it. It should be easy. It should be simple. So if, and I know I'm going over the top here, but if you can make it, 4 words I mentioned last time at the Carology last time were simple, easy, quick, and transparent. I don't know if you remember them, but they were the 4 key things which make everything work. And that's not genius for me to say that, but simple and easy, great, I can do it without thinking. Quick, we're all impatient now, and transparent is building trust. If you can nail those 4 things, it's going to be even more important with EV, then you're going to win. Not easy to do, but have in the back of your mind, am I making this simple? Am I making this easy? Am I making this quick? Do you trust what I'm saying here? If you think that all the time when you're creating your marketing communications, when you're taking your pictures, when you're building your website, when you're advertising your car on your forecourt, if you're not doing those 4 things, or one of those 4 things at least, then you might be turning off your customers.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'd agree, Nick. It's always, there's always some element of change going on. Sometimes there's more than at other times. In the last few years, plenty of change with the supply thing and the added lens of the electric thing now. And I think in general, like in any kind of business, those who kind of, it's a bit of a cliche, but kind of embrace the change, it presents an opportunity for business growth and to become more effective and kind of increase your market share. And for those that aren't prepared for change, ultimately that offer kind of doesn't work out too well. So it's as much an opportunity as anything, I think, for dealers that are tuning to this, listening to this, and thinking about it. And like we said, it doesn't have to be overhaul of operations and training and everything overnight. But certainly, I think it's something that's worth sort of certainly thinking about, sort of getting started with to some degree with some of those kind of actionable tips that you've mentioned there within the dealership. So Nick, listen, I wanted to thank you again so much for joining us. And you mentioned that you'd spoken at a couple of previous Carologies, and I will share that one of the reasons that we're speaking today is that the dealer feedback that we've got each time you've spoken, and we've said, well, who would you like to hear more from? What would you like more from? More Nick King is the answer that we get. So they request, we deliver. That's why we're here speaking with today. And listen, I hope everyone's enjoyed it, tuning in as well. Thank you again, Nick, for taking the time and sharing the insights with us. I'm sure we'll be seeing you again soon on another kind of interesting topic. For those of you watching, do keep an eye out for AutoTrader Carology Talks. We'll be doing more of these, like I mentioned at the top, in a more virtual format, so you can enjoy it on demand. In the meantime, please visit go.trader.ca. We have our newsroom there, as well as a number of other resources, but there's lots of interesting stuff there. All the consumer research that we do, we publish the results there. Tips and tricks on how to merchandise better. We actually did a really interesting study just recently about the tangible impact, and that's across hundreds of thousands, millions of data points. What actual impact does it have when you take better photos, better merchandising, price more accurately? And it's really stunning, actually, the uplift in leads that you can achieve. So that piece in particular is interesting. It's there on go.trader.ca. And if you want a more kind of to be kept more up to date in a more passive way, then obviously find us on LinkedIn, search for AutoTrader.ca. Again, we post a lot of our content there, research, tips and tricks, things like that. And if you follow us, then you will be alerted to when we have some new insight, new content for you to enjoy, such as things like Carology Talks, which today was with our good friend, Nick King. So just what leaves me to say, thanks once again, Nick.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me. Lovely to see you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. See you next time. Cheers.